Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of Triple Take Cinema. My name is Dustin Zick. With me, as always, is my co host Alex and my co host Kyle, who I just in my head wanted to call Jake for some reason, but I won't do that again. So just pointing that out. Maybe I can do that. Maybe we should just like call each other, like make up different names for every episode of this. Anyways, no, we won't do that. But each episode, we take three movies and we take our three different takes on all three of those movies. So I guess technically it's like 9 take cinema, but we call it triple take. So this week, I got to pick three movies and I picked the theme of documentaries, broadly speaking. I picked two movies I'd seen before and one I'd never seen but heard of. So the ones that I had seen were Art and Craft from 2014, Finders Keepers from 2015, and the one that I hadn't seen but had heard of was Fire of Love from 2022. Before we get into these, Alex, what was your familiarity with any of these?
Yeah, this was a really fun episode because I had zero familiarity in terms of I didn't know any of these three movies existed, knew nothing about any of them. So I was going in as blind can be. And I really enjoyed these to different levels. And I think coming in with no prior knowledge or context, was really exciting. I was probably the least excited to watch Finders Keepers just based on the premise of the three. That one felt like kind of the most, kooky, maybe like it was going to be, just kind of taking the piss and making fun of these two guys, but it ended up being my favorite. And I'm excited to talk about all three of these, but especially that one. So this was a wild ride into documentary filmmaking. What about you, Kyle?
That was your favorite. Can't wait to talk about it. I was not as blind as Alex, which is an evergreen statement. Woo! Got him.
Damn. Dropping
Got him.
zingers, fucking
Coming in,
zingers.
coming in hot, baby. Coming in hot. No, I wasn't as blind as Alex because I had also I had not heard of the other two. Art and Craft and Finders Keepers, but I had heard of Fire of Love. It did make some buzz, I don't know, a year and a half ago or so, I think. And it was one of those movies that, and this is again, thankful for the podcast, it was one of those movies that I put on, and it just wasn't the right time for me to put it on with what I was doing and who I was that day, and the time and my tiredness and all those things. So I put it on, and it just didn't like capture me. So again, a movie that the podcast just forces you to like whatever that initial reaction is to kind of push through and yeah, so I will say I am a aggressive consumer of documentaries. I have been known to use documentaries to make myself feel better about the world, and I do that by watching, generally speaking, documentaries about super messed up stuff.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say make yourself feel better about yourself. So watching documentaries about less fortunate people or something like that.
I mean, it's not incorrect. I'm not too proud to admit that sometimes when I'm feeling bad about the world or myself or all those things in between, I'll put on a documentary and I'm like, could be
Yeah.
way worse. Could
Way
be
worse.
way worse, dude. This shit is fucked. So, yeah, that was my familiarity. Almost nothing, and enjoyed them all to varying levels of degrees. But most likely in opposition to whatever Alex says.
Okay. Well, let's spin off of that pun, various level of degrees, and I'd like to start with Fire of Love first. I think this is, if you were to present these three documentaries to someone with the premise of this podcast and tell them that there's one of these three that the person who picked hadn't seen, I feel like it'd be pretty obvious that this is the one that I hadn't seen, because to some extent, from a thematic standpoint, it diverges from the other two in a way that I think isn't problematic or anything, but is pretty notable. Whereas the other two, I think, are really Americana quirky storytelling to a certain extent. This one, I mean, they're French, so obviously not Americana, but like is definitely more artfully told. which, to your point, Kyle, in 2022, when it was released at Sundance, it was nominated for Best Documentary for the Academy Awards. It did not win. But I'd heard of this. I think it made its way to the Milwaukee Film Festival in 2022, which is probably, or 2023 even, which is probably when it was on my radar. Uh, uh, Ironically, the other two movies I saw at the Milwaukee Film Festival, but so this one, it definitely like been on my radar. I generally like enjoy Nat Geo like documentary movies, like the higher produced, and not that any of theirs are not highly produced, but like the more widely distributed ones that go beyond just National Geographic Channel kind of a thing. And this took me, I ultimately really liked this, but I think it took me two or three times to finish, or like two or three sessions to finish, just because I wasn't giving it my full attention. And I would say out of the three, like I think part of that is because I really wish I could have seen this on the big screen. I think that
Yeah, absolutely.
visually it would have been so, and audially, like the sound in this is
Mm-hmm.
incredible.
Yep.
I like was so enthralled in so many of the sequences with the sound editing that they did. There was one when they, after Mount St. Helens erupts, which this reminded me that I bought a nonfiction book like a year ago about different accounts of people that witnessed Mount St. Helens eruption, which I'm excited to finally dive into after watching this, because that's always been a natural event that's like fascinated me, because I feel like 1982 wasn't that long ago, and yet you really like, it's just wild to me that like that happened so recently in America, and it's just not something you hear about in the same way. Like there's Hawaiian volcanoes that have erupted, but like as far as I know, in the continental US there hasn't been another volcanic eruption since then. But there's a sequence in Fire of Love when Katya and Maurice are coming after St. Helens erupts, and they come and spend their 3 months, but they're like from the perspective of the helicopter going up to the top of the summit, and the bass from the audio, like I thought like my furnace was breaking down or something, because like my whole living room
Mm-hmm.
was shaking as it was just building up in intensity into that reveal when they got there. And just so cool visually, like it's such a wonderful uh wonderfully told story of this couple and their expertise and their, I mean, it really doesn't talk too much about their relationship, but I'm okay with that given all of the other footage they have of like, I'm fascinated by stories that are able to be told by this ephemera of all of these old like interviews they've done, the audio recordings, the footage they shot themselves, which they were beautiful filmmakers, and the things that they caught, like everything just felt so poetic and visually stunning. It was really interesting to go into Letterboxd and look at my friends that had reviewed this, and a good friend of mine had seen it at the Milwaukee Film Festival and did not like it at all. She thought it was boring. And what was wild to me is I was like, well, she got to see it on the big screen and she didn't like it. And like, to me, this movie is as much about the visuals and the audio as it is about the story being told. And I think that independent of each other, there's really, not that there's not a lot there, but it doesn't carry the same weight as they do kind of merged together. But I just thought, yeah, like this just felt very different from the other two in terms of being like a work of art in a way, where the other two are straight up stories being told, and not necessarily visually capturing artistic flourish, uh, despite what Mark Landis might want you to see in his work. But yeah, like Kyle, what did you think of this one?
This this is my favorite of the three. I'll just spoiler. I really liked it. I it was almost I I enjoy. There's. It reminded me of another movie, of another documentary. I don't know if either of you have seen, called The Alpinist. Seen this? Heard of this?
Mm-mm.
Have not.
check it out. And really, the reason, and not in any content, but just in form. And the form of both of those movies is to tell you that these people are going to die very early on, and to tell you that they are, spoiler to anyone who's not watched it, to tell you that they are going to die, and to then unfold their passion on screen in a way that is, it's easy to, like when Christopher McCandless went off into Alaska and died at the bus through his own, will or whatever. A lot of Alaskans were like, "What an idiot! Like, what is this stupid? Why is this kid so stupid? Why did he do this?" So it can be easy to take someone's passion that doesn't work out in many ways. Other, we all die, but we don't always. All of us get to do the things that these characters did. Characters, people. And so I think it really takes a deft touch from a documentary filmmaker, and it also requires the subject and the person or persons in the subject matter to be of a particular type, to not like really to celebrate the passion despite it leading to an end that maybe is too soon. The alpinist is very soon. I mean, rock climbers tend to die before they're 30. Uh, and and these people lasted quite a bit longer, but the it was it really was, it had like, the flow of it was really spectacular for a documentary about two people just chasing volcanoes. And the the footage was tremendous. There is something just mesmerizing about volcanoes, and I think that, similar to, I think it's easy to accomplish in some documentaries about people's passions, especially ones that lead to their death. But I felt, I understood the reason, the call of their passion because of what I was being shown visually, and it did help that they filmed all the footage, most of the footage, and so that to me is just, it's a very, this time when it hooked me, when I was watching, and it really did. I think I must have missed the first time I tried to watch this, because I watched about 20 minutes the first time, and when I say the first time, I mean like a year and a half ago. When I watched and I was shocked because I'm a documentary person, so I was just kind of like, "Oh, this is the best documentary. Everyone's talking about it," and it just didn't get me. And I think I must have missed that they died early on when I was watching it, which is, I don't know how, but
I,
I
I
I
don't
have that has to be the reason.
I don't know that, or you mean you missed in the story of the documentary, or you just missed that knowledge overall?
Oh, no, I missed it in like the beginning when they essentially tell you that that's happening, that that's going to happen.
Oh,
Right.
I think I missed that too. Then,
Yeah, no,
because
they
I
they
mean, they do tell you, but it is understated. Like
yeah,
it is understated. Yeah, it's not. It's not. It's understated because it's not meant to be dreary or dreadful, or to
right.
create that sense of whatever. But yeah, I mean, the sound merging with those visuals and those close-up shots of those volcanoes, and the whimsical nature of Maurice, and how it combines with Katya, and how they're just this, I loved how there was no, and they're like, well, there's really nothing about their relationship before any of this. Like, they recorded everything, but not this, and there's nothing about their lives, and
yeah,
then they just emerge on the scene, and it's just, it's told so well, and the narrator was so good. I thought, when it because it's just kind of required in a movie like this. It's not going to be that heavy on the interview,
yeah,
and I really appreciated how they gave us the information of like, yeah, they did this, but then like they had to go back, and he had to do all the publicity, and he had to go on all the talk shows, and that was what he was good at, and she had to cut all this stuff and write the books, and like the actual nuts and bolts of funding the science. But it didn't get bogged down anywhere, and it really stayed with them, and their journey, and Mount St. Helens being, that very impactful event that took them back to wanting to use this knowledge to somehow save people, as difficult as that is with volcanoes and most natural disasters, but seemingly very specifically volcanoes, was great. And I got a sense of the community that they were a part of, but I just, it was almost a movie that I didn't want to be over. When it was over, I was just like kind of happy to be in that dreamland of volcanoes. And it definitely was, I started looking up flights to Iceland, being like, I gotta go see some lava. Like I gotta get after this at some point in my life. Like this is pretty, it's mesmerizing is the only word I can use. Like, yeah, I could just stare at one of those, slowly bubbling situations of the Earth erupting, but in a very nice and calm way. That's not a gray volcano that's going to kill me. Yeah, splendid. So I was. Yeah, it was almost a documentary where I was like, I mean, I'm probably gonna fall asleep because it's now 1 in the morning, but like, just put it back on, just put it back on, and just like, I'll just let it lull me to sleep. But in like a very comforting way, despite it being about these two people's arcs all the way to death.
It
Alex,
was
what was your? Yeah. Oh no.
just really quick. Like, I think it was another thing that was like really added to my enjoyment of this, and I kind of touched on it a little bit, was just like the footage. Like, it it's for what for the fact that they recorded so much of this footage. I would argue it's probably 80% or more of the movie is like their self-recorded footage. And it could, and they were so, and the movie does a great moment where they call out, the fact that they said, well, we're not filmographers. And it's like, but are you sure you're not? Because you're pretty
Right.
damn good at it, and like far
Mhm.
above the average person. And the fact that they could have so easily not been good at that and had all this footage, but like had it been like just kind of boring or static or like extra shaky, like all of these things could have gone wrong with getting footage just by virtue of someone who that's not their focus and they're not thinking about how do we make this interesting. But the fact that they caught so much that was so interesting and so unique, and that they were not not only unafraid of being on camera, but seemed to really relish being on camera in some degree, if only to provide context for the enormity of what we're seeing. I think really just adds to this like charm of this, and the just makes you want to watch it because it's so visually striking and interesting and human. Like, I think it's like seeing them physically there in these environments innately makes it more interesting as a consumer, at least in my mind, because you're getting that contracts and that size of like, wow, this is huge. Like some of the images of like, I'm looking at the poster cover in that scene where the two of them are like in the silver suits and the lava's blowing up behind them, and like it looks like an optical illusion, and I still don't know. I'm like, it's gotta be massive. Like it takes up the entire frame. And so yeah, like I mean, this is a movie that I feel like there's, if I could just capture like screenshots from this movie, it would be awesome to have like on my computer desktop and blown up as pictures, framed pictures in my house. And yeah, just like visually and audially, I just love this on every note. But Alex, your thoughts?
Yeah, you guys nailed a lot of it. I really do think that this is the most cinematic by a wide margin of the three that we watched. And just as you were just saying, Dustin, as an audiovisual experience, it is really something to behold and just kind of drink in. And I like how you referenced the poetry of it. And Kyle, you kind of talked about it being mesmerizing. And I think both of those elements work in tandem really fucking well in the introduction, which is just so perfectly paced and calibrated, where you've got them kind of slushing through the sleet and the ice and the muck to get to Mount St. Helens, and then there's that great reveal of the lava with that kind of roaring sound effect that just fills your ears, even if you're watching it on a laptop like I was. And to the point about the poetry, I love how the opening credits kind of treat the volcanoes as the third part of this doomed epic love triangle, where it's listing, who the main players are, obviously, Katya and Maurice, but also Mount St. Helens and all the other volcanoes that feature really prominently in this. I love just that flourish. And talking about just the massive amounts of archival footage that they had to work with really underscores that this is kind of a triumph of film editing in a way that was really impressive to behold. And just the way that footage is stitched together, knowing when to slow down and pick things up, talking about that introductory scene, it's very leisurely. It really lets you feel like you're, trudging along through the slush with them to get to the top of that crater. And then later there are these montage scenes, and they're often scored with that kind of scratchy, rock and guitar that's playing and providing the soundtrack for much of this. The wonderful narration by Miranda July. Everything about this movie just feels very, very French and European. I feel like I needed to be smoking a cigarette, and drinking some red wine while watching this. It just had, this grunginess, but also this sophistication in the music, in the narration, the tempo of the editing. I also really love those little animated sequences that we got. Just another example of this movie really being kind of balls to the wall, cinematic and artistic, and not being afraid to take big swings. I think the one thing that I might have been craving more from it as a documentary is, and I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth here because it's something I both appreciated but also wanted more of, which is more of kind of a look into Katya and Maurice's psyches and kind of their relationship. Where, on the one hand, I appreciated that it leaves the viewer to make their own conclusions, especially in format where we're often told in the form of these talking head interviews, what to think or what to feel about people and their interactions. But here, things are much more subtle, where they lay the groundwork that Maurice is kind of the risk taker, and he was the one who was really pushing them to kind of chase the gray volcanoes and do the more death-defying shit, whereas Katya was a little bit more measured and reserved in her kind of risk taking. And I think there's an elegance in like having a lot of that be something that the reader or the viewer kind of infers just by watching them talk, and even they mention it a couple times. But there was something about their relationship where I wanted to be brought closer into that. And there was something a little bit surface level about just them and their love of the volcanoes as being like their driving force, their singular passion. It was their love language that brought them together. And to your point, Kyle, that's what makes this really wonderful as a viewing experience is you're totally right. We don't feel a sense of like looming tension or dread knowing that they're going to die. Like it's almost kind of this very, you know, slow paced, steady, like walk to inevitability. There's not the tension about knowing that they're going to die. It just feels like something that's bound to happen because of their shared love language. But yeah, I did find myself craving just more insight into kind of them as people. But I also wonder if that would have taken away from the wonderful visuals that we get from letting the story be communicated through their footage, which is such a cool artistic choice and so kind of bold and stylistically different from, most other documentaries. So I really do think that they made a smart choice in taking this like bounty of riches that they had and all these hours and hours of footage and making a film constructed around this. I texted you guys about this, but I would love to, now that I've seen this, see Werner Herzog's take on the exact same material. Same year that this came out, 2022, Herzog also did a documentary about Maurice and Katja Kraft. And yeah, I'm gonna have to check that out now to see like if it does give me more of that,
I don't I don't think it does. I was reading up on it a little bit the other day, and it sounds like it's more of a, he described it as a requiem for them. So it's really um, it's leveraging almost entirely footage they shot with music and some limited narration. So it's more of just like a visual appreciation of their talents. Um, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I just almost wonder if we just don't know that much about them and their relationship. It seemed like they were so attached to volcanoes that was it, and I don't believe they had kids.
I don't think
It
they had kids. Yeah.
yeah, it was a choice or a for the filmmakers to like not seek out any new interviews with people who knew them, but also knowing that the age at which they died and that they died going on 40 years ago now, like how many people that knew them well are still around, kind of a thing. Like, so yeah, I would not be surprised if there just isn't a lot out there about their life, certainly their life before they met each other, but even their life. It seems like their life outside of volcanoes really wasn't a thing. Like volcanoes were their life.
Right, totally.
Um,
And I think
yeah,
there are good examples of them, like they do use show, not tell, to kind of convey some of that nuance.
yeah.
I'm thinking of the scene where Maurice is going out in the inflatable into like the sulfur lake, and
The sulfuric acid lake.
and
Wild.
it's a wild, hilarious scene. It's also again really fucking well edited because we get this great little like a bunch of quick little cuts showing like skeletal remains of like squirrels and animals who have gotten eaten up by the sulfur, and then we've got Maurice and his colleague out in that like flimsy ass inflatable, and then you I think you get a close up of Katya, and a lot's communicated by like she's pissed off, she's afraid. Like that is a really like subtle, nice bit of filmmaking to show like the montage of the danger, and then show the reaction on her face and kind of like the incredulousness of you know even in the context of them being the only two people who like would have this kind of relationship, do this stuff. There's still a level of risk taking and almost like, I don't want to call it self-destructiveness, but there's definitely some self-destructiveness when it comes to Maurice's like willingness to put himself in these situations just to experience them.
Yeah. Yeah, he was. I mean, he said it right in that one quote where he's like, "Nah, I don't need to live a long life. I'd rather live a life just filled with some wild, paraphrasing
Yeah,
here, but some wild shit, some exciting stuff."
yeah,
So yeah, I don't think, uh, I don't think that these people like offered that to the world. Partly because what they did was always remote and always, you know what I mean? Like, I just don't think it's available. They're people who it's just their actions speak to their, I guess, I don't know, there's probably a lot more interviews with Maurice we could sort through, but at the end of the day, those are interviews, like you're in a certain sense performing to some degree.
yeah,
And they did kind of intimate that he knew that that was part of it, like you got to get the grant money, you got to get the next money, you do have to be a bit of a salesman on your own life, to keep the good times rolling and to pay for the passion.
yeah,
Yeah, I thought all that stuff was really interesting and layered when they did get into like just the how of how they constructed this lifestyle.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the next movie, and I'm really torn on which one to move to next. Do you guys have a preference? I'm like I love both of these. I'm really like I'm trying to think which one would feed into more conversation for the other one.
I feel like Alex said that he liked Finders Keepers the best, so we should go to Art and Craft and say
Art and
Finders
Craft.
Keepers for, yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. Let's do Art and Craft. The story of Mark Landis, notorious art forger and all around interesting character. Kind of almost in a way, I feel like a human Eeyore could be one way to describe Mark Landis. I saw this at the Milwaukee Film Festival at 2014, 2015. And the director and Mark Landis himself were in house for a Q&A session afterwards.
Wow.
I don't really. It was a smaller theater, Alex. For your context, it was uh, the Downer. It wasn't the Oriental, so it was like a tiny, like narrow theater. And I don't remember any questions. I just remember that Mark Landis, like, he like, not that I really like walked away from the movie watching it being like, is this guy for real? Like, it felt pretty clear that he's like, is who he's presenting as, kind of a thing. But seeing him like walk down the aisle of the theater to the front, like, I was like, yep, this is the guy from the movie. Like, just same kind of posture. I think he had a bigger, like, not a trench, like a trench coat, like down trench coat thing on, just like kind of dopey looking. Yeah, I just find, like, I find the story in this to be fascinating. I find the person, the two main people. I mean, Mark Landis is by and far like the main character in this piece, but I feel like the one uh art curator that kind of like makes it his mission to like outlandis is also like another lead character in this, and I find him to be fascinating in his own right. I just think that, like, it's just wild to me. And rewatching this, like, I had to kind of like like retrain my brain to think of this accurately, because in the back of my head I was like, oh yeah, like he's like really really talented art forger that like fooled a bunch of people. And it's like, yes and no. Like he's a really good artist, but he's not a great artist. Like, half of his fooling people is how he gets the, like, who he picks to donate the works to, and how he pitches the works to the people. And the fact that they up until the point of the story or whatever hadn't taken any sort of effort to look at anything with, like there's a really telling scene towards the end when the curator that had been on the mission is out of town at the other gallery that's going to do the Mark Landis exhibit, and he's looking at all the works that have been acquired for this exhibit, and he just like pulls up a black light and can immediately identify, oh, that's fake, that's fake, that's fake. And it's like, man, that's all it took. Like, you didn't need a magnifying glass, you didn't need a tweezers. You literally just flick on a black light and there's obvious like indicators that maybe this isn't what we think it is, kind of a thing. Um
I mean,
and
that's
so,
part of what makes it emotionally interesting, right? Is like a lot of these curators are pissed off because they're embarrassed that
yeah,
they like, their hubris and their arrogance kind of got the better of them, and they were like, yeah, of course we'll take this donation without like investigating. So it shows like how sloppy a lot of this
yeah.
world is.
Well, and I think what's extra jarring and fascinating to me is like the fact that, and I feel like you finally get to see it when he goes to that exhibit himself, when Landis goes to that show at the end and is interacting with people in the crowd, because all the other footage and interviews we have of Landis, he is just this awkward, like, weird looking bit of a slob in his house, and you're just like, how does this guy fool anyone? And then you see him in person like talking to these people, and he's like turning on the charm, and he's suddenly like super, like, not only like, it's not like he wasn't talkative in the Q&A interview, like the talking head interviews. He definitely like talks and likes to hear himself talk, but it's a totally different affect when he's like in person with people. And like, it's like he's just embodying these characters that he's playing. So you can totally see how he rolls up in his nice car to an art gallery at a prestigious school or whatever, and it's like, oh, my great aunt died and I want to donate these. Like, I just find that juxtaposition to be completely like fascinating. And the fact that we never get a clear answer from him as to why he does this, I think is equally fascinating to me, and not at all like dissatisfying. I feel like it very much could be dissatisfying, but I love I mean, I think the answer is probably because he can, and he doesn't, and he's also has some mental issues, so he like maybe can't think of a clear reason not to, kind of a thing. But um yeah, I mean, the only other thing is I'll point out before I kick it to one of you is that I've never seen someone take a more disgusting drag on a cigarette than I've had seeing this guy when he lights up a cigarette and just looks like, I'm like, what are you doing? This is so awkward and weird to see you smoking your cigarette like
Yeah.
this.
It's not a cool cigarette smoke. It's not a
No, no.
it's whatever the opposite side of the coin from Humphrey Bogart
I do
is.
appreciate though that like 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 how like if it only it were like 60 years ago, like the advertising firms would be like just wetting their pants over excitement over the fact that I don't know why wedding, I've never used that analogy before in my life, but over the fact that he's like, oh well, I needed to like lower my stress and
Or
I thought they
anxiety.
always do it in the movies. I'm like, really, that worked on
Amazing.
you? So
I mean,
yeah.
but also, yeah, but I also love that he he's getting that from Turner Classic Movies. Like
Yes.
he's getting that from like men telling women to calm down and giving them a cigarette to execute
Hmm.
that. Like that was, yeah. I mean, that was the him picking up the cigarette smoking was really an unexpected turn in the movie for me. It's like,
Well,
oh, what?
that whole subplot, like about, or just part of his life and personality, that like he is so seriously like mentally ill that he is picking so much up from like classic cinema, was just wildly fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like part of what like this movie to me rewatching it especially feels like one it's one that I wrestle like I definitely am not like I wouldn't say there's parts in this movie where I kind of like chuckled at the absurdity and whatnot, but there was no moment where I felt like I was laughing at him or anything. There's no like, and there's it's a tough one in which do I feel like it's objectifying him or whatever the right term would be, like is he an exhibit in a zoo that we're watching kind of a thing, but then he clearly has enough autonomy that like I don't feel like he like just doesn't have to or like he's just not aware of like what's going on or anything like that. um like I really would be interested in knowing like what his actual like mental disorders are, and I think I know at one point he's literally another great moment is like he's literally reading the paperwork from when he was a kid of like all the different diagnoses he got, and he's like, oh, they said I had that and then they said I had that and then he just like puts that paper on a random pile in his living room. um I did see somebody on like a doctor. Okay, so he somebody said that he thought he was more likely bipolar than schizophrenic, and so like that kind of tracks with me or whatever. And then obviously like your living environment and how you were raised factors into that to some extent too, and how you deal with a mental disorder and whatnot. Um, but yeah, I mean, just everything watching this and it, like watch him walk through his house. There's some great moments where like the cameraman like he's walking through his house and like cut to his feet and you just see him like walking over random papers and I'm like, this looks like half of the estate sales I've ever been to. It's just random things spread all over. Um, I don't know. One of you take this. I'm just rambling, but I just find him to be such a fascinating character to like have a story told on film.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly is that. The thing that kind of struck me about the story, and they don't spend too much time on it, but it's a bit of a what's the exact word I'm looking for here? But it's kind of like it rem- the way that he describes his childhood and the way that he talks about his parents. The childhood he describes is so of that era of the like we have a kid, but they're just kind of here. You know what I mean? Like the idea that his parents are out in Europe and they're like, you know what? Just hang out here. Like the hotel people will check on you occasionally,
Mm-hmm.
maybe. And like we're gonna go out and just carouse in Paris all night. and I'm sure, stay out till all hours, get back till 2, 3 in the morning, wake up. Like, it was this very interesting portrait of childhood that also, I don't think caused his. Obviously, a lot of that is just there, but certainly didn't work against it, I guess, in helping to create the person that he was. And then I was kind of shocked that he had the devotion to his parents with some of the ways that he described them. But again, like, it was just one of those portraits of looking back in time and how parenting or the lack thereof used to be, like what having a kid was like. And it was like, I don't know, we just have a kid. We just have kids. Like, we just do stuff and their kids are there. And of course, that wasn't everyone, but I don't know. So that made me think a lot about like modern parenting compared to that, and then you see the character that he is, and it was definitely a fascinating portrait. I I kind of the movie did a good job to the point you made, Dustin, about like you never were really laughing at him. I think it really came close to that line a couple of times, and that's a delicate line to be anywhere near, but it did a good job of kind of like pulling that back in various ways with like the counselor that checks in on him and asks him how he's doing,
Yeah,
and just and yeah, and kind of also making sure to highlight the whole don't necessarily feel too bad for this guy because he's doing what he enjoys doing, and it's not really harming anyone except that one dude in Ohio. They couldn't like let it go. And yeah, I mean, it came close to that, and there were times when it was a little difficult, but it also, I don't know, I really enjoyed wrestling with just the ethical question of what he was doing, and what he was getting over on people. And it's kind of amazing how, if he goes in there and he's like, I have this work, all I want is $20,000 for it, like that none of this happens, none of it. If he goes in and it's like, I want $5 for this, none of this happens. And if he goes in and he says he wants $2 million, none of this happens, right? Like, there's the only way this happens is like the way that he executes it. And it was kind of cool to be like, I mean, if this is how you want to spend your time, like, get after it. I don't know where
Yeah.
the money's coming from, but
Yeah.
sure.
yeah,
Yeah. That's and well, and it's like, yeah, like this, maybe not as a movie, but like this, what he's doing could very easily be spun as like just an indictment on gallery curators and how poorly they're doing their work, and like could be
Hmm.
an Esquire article about that, right? And how this guy's prolific journey to out lazy gallery uh curators like involves him being like a half-assed decent forger who like knows how to pick things and whatnot, and like, and the fact that he donates these forgeries and like make it on the wall and nobody calls it out, like, so the fact that someone, and I don't remember if the movie, I don't think the movie explains like how they learned about him, but I presume it's from the guy from Ohio that like kind of
Yeah,
raised the attention of it or something.
it's that dude. I believe he gets a work from him, and then he does like he's trying to research that work, and in so researching, he finds that work is at 6 other museums,
Okay.
and he's like, "That's not right." And then he
Yeah.
decides to make that his life's goal, and largely upends his
Yeah,
whole his whole
loses his
life.
job,
hmm
and then I thought the scenes with him and his daughter were, they were very brief, but I was like, what are you like? This does not make you look any less crazy when you're like with your daughter in your kitchen and she's like asking you questions about Mark Landis and whatnot. I don't
yeah.
Yeah,
know.
In some ways, that was more disturbing to me than anything we saw Landis do, because Lester Sullivan, the Ohio curator who becomes obsessed with him, like, you get the sense that he has more self awareness. He may have other mental things he's struggling with, but he doesn't have like the kind of serious illnesses that were shown um, that Landis does. So yeah, I felt I felt really bad for Lester Sullivan's daughter in those scenes, and just like it does paint a pretty damning picture of him in a very short amount of screen time. But yeah, I totally agree with what you were saying, Kyle, about this kind of coming very dangerously close to to being exploitative of Landis, and I think ultimately it does walk it back. It's really shrewd that they do show those scenes of uh, his Landis's like social worker, counselor, and like that gives you a vulnerability, that gives you a humanity and an empathy that you wouldn't get if it was just kind of painting this, this wacky character of him. I do think some of the scenes kind of showcasing the hoarding in his house were the ones that felt probably the most uncomfortable to me as a viewer, and felt the most like, I was kind of getting an emotional, rush out of seeing kind of this guy's squalor in a way that lacks some texture. But we do get some insight into the fact that that really got worse when his mom died, and what you were saying, Kyle, about just that crazy upbringing he had that was very normalized at the time, where in his case, like all of these mental issues he was living with, probably got very limited attention, and allowed him to kind of, find his own passion in a weird way with this forgery. I think that's another thing that kept it from being, you know, from crossing that boundary for me as a viewer, is knowing that there is like joy and fulfillment that he's getting out of this pursuit, and there's a cheekiness to it, there's like an impishness of it, where you can like see this little smile he gets where he's like, yeah, I just like fooling him and talking about adopting the different personas, where it's endearing, right? There's a gentleness in like the con that he's pulling, and I think it's also shrewd of the filmmakers to put that clip of the FBI kind of art forgery expert really early in the film, and basically be like, yeah, we can't prosecute this guy for anything, he's not doing anything illegal.
He hasn't committed fraud. Yeah.
Right, yeah. And then it does become, again, to your point, Kyle, like a really interesting philosophical exercise into like, well, how do we evaluate like the morality of what he's doing? Like, is it so bad, or is he just kind of like, pulling the pants down on a lot of these very pompous, self-absorbed curators who aren't doing the diligence they should be for such, expensive, important works of art. Um,
And
Well,
if
and it's
people enjoy it at the museums, right? Like that's the
right,
other
yeah.
thing, right? I mean, they're good forgeries. They're good replications, whatever you want to call them. And like if people at the museums are enjoying them,
Well, and
it's very bizarre. Yeah.
it's interesting too because we never really get. I mean, we get what you kind of alluded to, Alex. Like we get a little bit of a hint. Like he obviously enjoys doing it, and we see that a little bit, but we never see him going like, "Yeah, fucked another one over" or anything, and we never see him being like, "Well, I think they're all crooks and they need to be, they're too lazy" or anything. We never really get. We certainly don't hear him ever say
right,
like, "I do it because X, Y, Z. I do it because I have money and this is tons of fun to me," or "I do it because I want to expose them for being lazy at their jobs." So like that just kind of adds to the ethical dilemma of like, okay,
right,
we don't even get a stake in the ground as to why he does it, why he says he does it. We have to kind of just think from the receiving end and what's going on there, and from there, and it's like, well, they kind of bear the brunt of the blame there because
right,
their sifter has holes in it the size of a country. Like things are just falling through without any sort of effort, especially when they show you later on the minimal amount of effort it takes to identify any of his works as forgeries. It's not like they need to bring in some expert from across the ocean to like identify it. It's like throw on the black light or like use a magnifying glass. That's a dot matrix printer. It's like, okay, like this is stuff that, I mean, like we could probably do if you gave us a little bit of direction, right? Like it's not rocket science.
I mean, that's the part of this that I did find interesting, and I definitely, disagree a little bit there, because I think there is a recognition of Landis's talent that we get from the other curators when they're talking to him, and they're kind of like, why the hell don't you just do this for real? Like, put your own name on the painting. Like, you got,
Yeah.
you're a talented guy. He may not be like a master artist, but I think enough talent to like make a name for himself and, you know, do this like more legitimately, which I think shows that for him, you know, it's kind of mirrored with the rest of his like mental issues. It's kind of like a compulsion that he can't stop doing.
Yeah.
Even at the very end, like we end with him going on another con. I think I think it might be him putting on the preacher collar, which is like a great little comedic moment. I
Hmm.
love that character he puts on.
I wonder too if it's part of it for him too is like he, with his mental baggage that he carries and how he, I mean, frankly, like physically how he presents himself in I mean, if you saw him and he came up to talk to you, like if what I'm trying to get at is like I wonder if by him doing these impersonations of a Jesuit priest or whoever it is donating these artworks, if that's a way that he subconsciously, unconsciously is able to socialize and like step out of the life he's built for himself, and so he feels like connected to people when he's doing these, what do you want to call it, when he's going in and impersonating someone because they're treating him as someone of respect and of someone higher up on a pedestal maybe than they are, if he's a wealthy donor or a priest or a doctor or whatever it is. So he's able to kind of engage with people socially from a perspective and an angle that he isn't able to do by himself. And if he gets fulfillment or satisfaction out of that, like they never really even push him to get any kind of context for that. Like that would have been something I'd be really interested in hearing, is trying to ask him questions about like, okay, like how do you decide who you're going to impersonate? Like what do you look up so that you sound like an expert? Like how long, what kind of conversations do you have with people when you're in character and things like that?
Right. I mean, it was really interesting. It was probably a couple months removed, but I did see Spielberg's Catch Me If You Can for the first time earlier this year, and
Mm.
you could not be farther apart from, Mark Landis and Leonardo DiCaprio are like diametrically as opposed as two human beings can be. But I do think that's a really good insight, and I think there is like a uniting thread in wanting to like put on these personas and yeah, get like some respect, get some social engagement where you're more on an even playing field and even kind of looked up to. And you get a bit of that at the end when he really lights up when he's at the exhibit about his forgeries and about himself and his work. And you really see him like, you know, being jovial and going up and talking to all these art students and curators and like, he's showing genuine interest in their lives because, they're showing him a level of respect that he probably doesn't get when, for example, he goes to see his social worker and like she asks him this laundry list of questions that are inherently dehumanizing. So I think there's like a really interesting role reversal that happens in that last, you know, 15-minute sequence we get of him just walking through the exhibit, especially him with interacting with Lester at that exhibit. I thought was great. There were so many like funny comedic moments with just like how frustrated Lester was getting and like how he wanted to have this catharsis and like to have Landis feel like some kind of shame or acknowledgement and he is just not wired that way.
No.
And I thought that was kind of amazing to like, again, like put the mirror on Sullivan to be like, dude, what are you doing? Why do you care this much? This guy like doesn't think about you at all. He like said to your face, like, yeah, like I don't read your emails, but now I will. Because we're friends. We like each other now. There's some great comedy there and like again, really interesting like social dynamics. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
I think
it's
the movie ended really strong.
well, and I feel like you can see him, like you can see the disappointment in him a little bit too, of like when Landis shows up. That I feel like that Landis showed up to begin with. Like he was like, oh, okay, I didn't like shame him out of his presence here. And then even though like I'm sure he'd seen pictures, maybe some video clips of him before, but just seeing him in person after you've built him up as this like villain in your life, like had to have been a huge kind of disappointment, right? And not, I
Yeah.
mean, just because like not only is he not like a physically intimidating person, but just like his persona that he puts off is not intimidating or cruel or mean or any villainous kind of adjective you can think of. So that was something I remember sticking with me the first time I watched it. It's just like how weird that must have been for him when Landis showed up, and then it was just like any way you would have written that going for yourself, that's probably not one of the ways you wrote, right? Like that's just not what you expected to happen.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's a good moment where this movie really does get at, like, I think Finders Keepers does it to an even greater degree, but it gets at like something really insightful about the human condition is when we do build shit up in our heads and like, do cast someone as the villain in our hero's journey and then being confronted with that reality and having it be as far from that story as you could possibly be is just, a clever little bit of filmmaking.
Before we shift to our last film, I just want to read a little snippet from the Wikipedia page on Mark Landis that I think, for me, it added a lot of context to his background, and I mean, it almost poses more questions than it answers, but certainly kind of fills in some blanks. So he was born in 55, 3 years after his parents married, and his dad was a lieutenant in the U.S. Navy. So when Landis was born, uh, they moved around a bunch, and they lived in the Philippines and Hong Kong. Then he was posted to NATO in Europe, where they lived in France, London, Paris, and finally Brussels. Which it says in Brussels, Landis began forging stamp cancellations for his friends. So even as a kid, he was doing forgeries of some sort. In 68, the family returned to the United States, settling in Jackson, Mississippi. In 71, Landis's father was diagnosed with cancer, from which he died the following year. At 17, Landis was deeply struck by the loss of his father, and he was treated for 18 months in a Kansas hospital where he was diagnosed with schizophrenic, paranoid, and psychotic disorders and catatonic behavior. Um, and then what I think is super interesting is after that, he attended art courses at the Art Institute of Chicago and then in San Francisco, where, among other things, he worked on the maintenance of damaged paintings. So to like that's really interesting because already had a background in forgery of some sort, and then to learn how to fix paintings that were damaged seems like a very like there's that scene in the movie where he talks about like was it a piece of wood or whatever that he stained with coffee on the back of it,
Mhm.
and I was just like this is just wild to think that like you're doing like it just like this on his TV tray in his bedroom, and like somebody might see that and think it's like this historic piece of artwork. So he did that, and then he bought an art gallery, but it was not successful, and he lost money in a real estate investment. In 1988, he decided to return to live with his mother and stepfather in Laurel, Mississippi. So there isn't a citation as far as the art gallery and the real estate investment, but assuming those are true, that is like I would love to know more about like why the art gallery wasn't successful and things like that, and if that might have factored into his choice of pursuing this route of forgery and donating things to galleries to try to get them placed in, because no matter how good of an artist you are, if your name isn't known, um, a well-known bad artist I feel like would have an easier day getting work in a gallery exhibit than a poorly known good artist in many instances.
Yeah.
All right, let's shift to the movie, Finders Keepers. So, where to even start with this? It's about a guy who loses a leg and another guy who buys a storage unit, like in Storage Wars, and happens to find the lost leg of the guy who lost the leg. It was in a grill or a smoker. I think it was a smoker specifically in
It
the
was a
storage
smoker.
unit. The partially, somewhat unsuccessfully, successfully mummified leg, and the battle between these two guys to figure out who owns the leg and their motivations therein. I'll let one of you guys kick off conversations on this one.
Alex, you take it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as I teased earlier, I went into this kind of being the least excited about it of the three because you alluded to it when we were talking about art and craft, Dustin, but the premise sounded like we were going to be, you know, laughing at these guys and their feud was going to be presented to us, the viewer, for our amusement. And what I really loved about it is that how it kind of slowly peels back different layers of the onion, and you get a greater and greater appreciation for like the levels of psychological nuance and kind of intergenerational trauma that's happening with these two characters, the way it builds empathy for both of them. At the beginning, the way that they're framing things, they really frame things as, John, the amputee who loses his leg, presents him as kind of like a cut and dry victim, and presents Shannon as this, the clearly more villainous, figure in this feud. And the way that the movie slowly undercuts that and reveals kind of the layers of Shannon's trauma, from like his abuse at the hands of his father to kind of this desperation for any kind of fame or notoriety, and the way that he exploits the situation to like kind of just hang on to any kernel of recognition is like deeply sad and humanizing. And I think the way that the movie just has this really smart dual structure where we're bouncing back and forth um, between John and Shannon, and like again, kind of slowly peeling back the different layers of their stories. This felt the most kind of nakedly sentimental of the three movies, where when you have different figures who are kind of relaying parts of John and Shannon's lives, there's music that swells and it's clearly meant to tug at your heartstrings. And I was always pretty aware that I was being kind of manipulated by these different filmmaking, techniques, and the use of certain quotes in the talking head interviews were really kind of, again, designed to kind of elicit a response in the viewer. But even as I was aware of that, I didn't really care, and I find myself like getting misty eyed at like different parts of it. When we learn the extent of what happens with the airplane crash that claims John's foot, there's one part where it breaks the fourth wall, and the person filming the sequence, asks him questions about like what it was like as he's going about the crash site and kind of reliving that experience. All that I just found like deeply, whereas Fire of Love was visually poetic, I found this the most poetic in terms of human nature. And one bit at the end I really love before I turn it over to you, Kyle, is another humanizing moment we get of Shannon, where again he's trying to like grab hold of any fame he can get. And I forget the name of the show that he's participating on, but he becomes aware that they're only featuring him on this program to kind of make fun at him. And you get that moment of recognition, you get this like anger, and he kind of stops playing ball for the first time in the movie and like almost develops a backbone and is like, I will not degrade myself to this level. I think that's like, just again poetic about what the the hunt for fame can do to someone, especially when they're driven by trauma and insecurity, the way that Shannon is. um yeah, I just found this really poignant, even if it did feel the most manipulative of the docs that we watched.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with the manipulative part. I I borderline didn't like this. I did enjoy it, but there were times when it felt a little bit like headline grab, where like you just said what this movie's about, Dustin, and I think you want it to be more whimsical, and there were times when it couldn't really figure out its tone of whimsy when Shannon's life is falling apart and it's clear that he doesn't understand that kind of the joke is on him and he's the one perpetrating it, and how that relates to it. It was painful to watch his wife stand there and then to eventually see this kind of, lead to the destruction of their relationship and just her not really having any idea what to do. It was tough to go down the pathway of just another, opioid story in America, with a tragic accident leading to, both for emotional pain and for physical pain, someone getting caught up in drugs. And the interviews, you know, it was a tough watch. It was kind of weird for me anyway, how the subject matter of what was driving it, right? This leg, mummified leg as well. That was just that I don't know. It was hard. I didn't love how it kind of handled that, and I think actually it's the kind of movie to me where if someone else were to have tackled this subject matter and maybe approached it from the accident. I don't know. I don't want to rewrite the movie. I want to critique the movie we watched, but I was like, I couldn't tell if I was supposed to feel bad. And again, it was a line that really, it was a movie that really sat on the line of making fun of laughing at a couple of its characters. It did get back to some wholesome, heartwarming moments with John, but all the Shannon stuff was difficult for me to sit through. And yeah, I don't know. Like it didn't. I guess I don't really know if they knew exactly what they wanted this to be, and in the end, they kind of tried to make it everything, and it didn't fail. But there were just times when, like when they go into the Judge Mathis stuff that they were doing, and I don't know, it just like Judge Mathis. It's just one of those things where you're watching characters, or people, which is one of the reasons it's so painful. You're watching people, and like anyone, and that Judge Mathis and those types of shows to me are like, these are people that they're exploiting these very vulnerable people who want some kind of combination of being on screen and having their situation heard because no one seems to care. And so those shows in and of themselves are like very poking fun at the people that don't seem to be in on the joke, of those shows in general. And I don't know, that was just difficult to watch, at times with Shannon. And I mean, it did all come to a head in the scene you mentioned, Alex. But yeah, I don't know. Like there were some things I liked. I did think the stuff with his dad, and the plane crash was kind of fascinating, and how he couldn't let that go. But it was a really, I guess I'll put it to you this way. This movie made me very sad, and not in a way that made me feel better after, enjoying someone else's misfortune. So yeah, I guess that was kind of weird, and I think because of how it starts with this, like, whoa, there's a leg and a grill, and everyone's having a good time with it, and this guy's kind of not giving it back, and it's wonky. It really turned into just like a real sad portraiture of both these characters and all the people around them. And there was some redemption, but yeah, I guess it made me sad, and I couldn't figure out which way it wanted to go. And you compare that to Art and Craft and Fire of Love, and those movies felt like they knew where they were going, what they were doing, and kind of the arc that the documentary was going to take. And it almost felt a little bit more meandering in Finders Keepers, where they started with this kooky story with kooky characters from the south of America, and they ended up with just a bunch of tragedy and not that much hope, but some. And yeah, it just left me a little bit like, I don't like this very much. Yeah, that's my general take on it. I also didn't think there was anything filmmaking wise that was too, in the sense of editing or cutting it together or giving us the information. There was nothing. I kept trying to have to kind of figure out where we were at and what tone we were at in the moment, and I didn't think it handled those transitions perfectly well. But I did, like I said, I didn't not enjoy it, but it's not one that there's some documentaries I could watch again, and this probably wouldn't be on the list, whereas Art and Craft and Fire of Love certainly would be.
I feel like that kind of just speaks to the the word that comes to mind is like the authenticity of this. Not that either of those other movies weren't authentic, but just like the realness and the rawness of this and the characters and the stories being told. I don't disagree with you as far as the the technical production wise being, not that it's poorly made, but
Right.
unimpressively made. I mean, certainly, I mean, like I feel like Fire of Love is in a class of its own. Looking at the three of these, so like ignoring that, but comparing this to like Art and Craft, I feel like there's a little more finesse in pacing, well done in Art and Craft. But I think that by nature of this, the snippet of Mark Landis's story that they're telling, it works that it culminates in this gallery exhibit about him, right? Like there is no natural culmination to there is and there isn't to the leg story in Finders Keepers. Because I tried to dig up, because most of what happens in this movie is in the course of 2004 to 2006 2007, and the movie came out in 2015. So I tried to, and I couldn't find any info on this. I'm really curious as to like when the documentarians started telling this story. Was it something that they worked on for 10 years? Did they get some of that? And it's hard to tell, like when they were interviewing Shannon and things like that in relation to like when he originally found the leg, because if they started, even if they hit pause for a number of years before they finished, if they started telling this story when Shannon first found the leg and it was making local regional news headlines because a guy found a leg and whatnot, I can see the lack of that meandering nature of this making more sense, because they're just kind of telling it how they learned it, where they started with this whoa guy found a leg quirky story, and then as they were like, oh, let's make a documentary about this weird ass thing, and then as they dive into it, they're like, oh, actually no, there's like two pretty tragic stories going on here, let's dive into those a little more. My hunch is not, though, that they started telling this story in 2005. I think they probably told it, built this documentary wholly after the fact. And I think that weakens it a little bit, especially hearing, how you were explaining it, Kyle. I do think, though, I do feel like it ends a bit more hopeful than maybe you felt it did. But that's really because I think you have two very different trajectories, right?
Yeah, one
Like
ends up here, the other ends way down there.
yeah, and like Shannon's story actually even gets more tragic because he had a heart attack and died in November 2016. But he basically spent the rest of his life billing himself as the footman, trying to be a celebrity based on that thing.
Yeah.
Which, as as sad as it is, and as I don't disagree with anything either of you have said. And the film obviously like gives that context of like people in his life saying why they think he is how he is and why he wants to be so famous and whatnot. the film also does a pretty damning job of showing how uncaring he is towards his wife, and like and the impact it has on her. So I find it harder to like empathize with his path. What I think is, I mean, obviously, like John's story is much more hopeful and optimistic, and we get the resolution for him, and we do get the resolution, I guess, with the leg of like, I still think it's weird that he saw his leg as something that he wanted to make as a shrine to his dad. And, you know, damn good on him for really seeing it through all these years later. Like, that seems like something you could have just thrown in the towel on at some point. But, like, I think it is kind of like, it's wild to me that like this man can like almost singularly credit Judge Mathis with his spring back in life. The fact that Mathis recognized he was on drugs when he was on the show, and not only like pulled him aside and said, look, man, you got to get your shit figured out, but like actually offered to like pay for him to go to rehab. Like,
Yeah.
good on John for taking that up and using it and getting on the right track and figuring his shit out. And I really, really do love the fact that that woman, that taxidermy woman, was like, I can help you.
Yeah.
Like that's the kind of shit that is like, what? Like there's people like, it's,
Dude, the South is weird, man. The
yeah,
South is weird. I
Yep.
have no problem saying that. I've been to many of those places and spent real time, and it is a weird place, but it has those characteristics
yeah,
where,
yeah,
like, someone will just be like, I'm just going to
yeah,
dedicate so much of this time to helping this person. I would have liked to. It's amazing that Judge Mathis wasn't a part of this documentary,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
That he
Right.
wasn't like, yeah, I don't need to give too much. I don't need to steal any spotlight, but like, it seems like a guy who would have loved to be on camera for a quick interview about this.
Yeah. Well, I also would have loved to watch like a 30-minute like tour of the veterinary woman's house too, because like when they go in her house and whatnot, I'm like, this tracks. Like your house looks like what, I mean, looks nicer than I would have expected, but also weird. And like, but so I feel like, yeah, like it's a interesting path to go down, telling like the story of each of these characters. These, they're not, well, they are characters, but like each of these
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
and seeing them through, not necessarily to, I mean, we get John's conclusion. I really do feel like we do. I mean, I'm assuming he's healthy, sober, hopefully all of those things today, but like we see him close the door on this.
Right.
And Shannon, we don't, but that's because that's who he is. And I mean, I don't like it really, well, I think it kind of, the movie does kind of like underscore that, like, yeah, like part of why Shannon like digs his claws into this idea and this leg thing is because he's always wanted to be more, and like this is like the most differentiating thing that's ever happened to him, and like, but
Right.
he just like hasn't, it's like, can you not, I'm trying to like stop myself from like knocking on somebody who's since passed, but it's just like, can you not figure out something else to do different or whatever? Like that is not, and it's not even that, like, for me as someone with like an advertising background, it's like, this is and a pun for, I was gonna say it's a very weak leg to stand on when it comes to like your
Nice.
hook and your brand.
Outrageous. Outrageous.
That just came to my mind before I realized it was a pun. But you know, you know what I'm saying? Like if you want your hook, like you're being the footman, like just isn't, there's a lot of explaining that has to go into that for that to be relevant enough that somebody wants to like amplify you up and sees value in what you're providing. And it's a limited, I don't know. I just think it's
Right.
like,
Well, we see all that, right? We see like what a struggle it is to like claw his way onto relevance and how he has to like
yeah,
he markets the grill as being a part of it, and like, he like tries to grab all these little kernels, and you put it beautifully, like things that differentiate himself, and that also adds to me, like, to the tragedy of, of this experience for him, is that like that was enough for
Yeah.
him to like build everything around it, like this crazy house of cards around, finding this kooky thing. And going back to one of your points, Kyle, about like the structure of this feeling meandering and kind of the tones feeling like it wasn't quite sure what it wanted to be. To me, this felt really clear-eyed and deliberate in terms of the tones that it started with and the tone it wanted to work towards, where we are presented with this story of like this wacky, like, foot found in a grill in a storage unit, and we get that in the way the story is told, where we get like these little, kind of goofy infographics that show you the journey that the foot took, to the storage unit, to the mortician's office. And like, we're presented the story the way that the media presents this story initially, as like this kooky oddity that we can all point at and laugh at. And then the structure of the movie is to like, dig into the human pathos and tragedy, like underlying that, that farce that we get on the surface level. And to me, the unifying thing is it does kind of turn the critique, not against these two guys, not against John and Shannon, but like against the media ecosystem and the culture that like feeds off of their pain and suffering, basically. Like, it's not wholly about that. There is this huge element of the opioid crisis and addiction and trauma, but I think there's enough for me to follow that through line of, kind of the media circus that ties all of this together, whether it's the Judge Mathis bit or that sequence at the end where Shannon goes on that new program. But that all felt part of the tone management that I would argue this movie is doing, is it is taking you from that, comedic surface level view. And we even get a quote from like a news commentator that like kind of made my blood boil in a way that I think was intentional, where the guy's like, man, what a circus, or what a freak show. And he's totally like, mocking their story. And at that point in the film, we as viewers have seen enough of like their real pain to like understand what he's mocking and what the culture and the media ecosystem that like feeds off stories like this is mocking. And, you know, I think that was a really effective bit of editing to like show that footage after we had already seen the tragedy of their story. So yeah, I would counter that this movie, in my viewing, was doing some tone management, and even though it like starts comedic and farcical and ends like very somber and tragic, but also with a kernel of hope with John's story, that I felt like I had, gone through an arc while watching it. And I did end up, at a low place. Like, this is a deeply sad movie. I felt very sad when it was over, and like a little bit gross. But I think that's part of why I did like it as much as I did, is that it, evoked a really powerful response in me that didn't feel exploitative. It felt like I had gotten insight into two people who I might not have if I had just read the headlines.
Yeah, fair enough.
All right. Kyle, rank them.
Oh, yeah, Fire of Love. Fire of Love number 1. Number 2, Art and Craft, and number 3, The Finders Keepers.
Kyle, what about you? Or not Kyle. Speaking of names, Brad, what about you?
Well,
what if we were all Kyles? Triple Kyle cinema.
I like Triple Brad cinema better. I think that has a nice ring to it.
Well, if we called it that, we would have to just be Brad cinema.
Brad Square.
If we could keep that going for any amount of time, it'd be something. Because it'd be like, Brad, what do you think? And then we just, well, I don't know.
It's just when we all talk over each other.
It would break down very quickly within like 10 minutes of the first step.
It'd be like
And
the
they
world's.
would just start fighting.
It'd be
It's
like
like he was talking to me.
Excuse me, I am the one true Brad.
the lamest knockoff of Who's on First.
So my number one is going to be Finders Keepers. My number two is going to be Fire of Love. And my number three is going to be Art and Craft. But I liked all these quite a bit.
I think I would say my number three is Finders Keepers. And then I'm really torn for one and two. I think I'd probably have to put. I think it really depends on like what I'm in the mood for, because I feel like Fire of Love and Art and Craft are so like two very different movies. So like if I want a movie that's really gonna like suck me in and like keep me focused on the screen, I think it's Fire of Love. But if I want to just like be, for lack of a better word, like entertained by someone's story and just kind of fascinated by the quirkiness of someone, it would be Art and Craft. But like right now thinking of the two that I'd already seen and rewatching, I mean, this is kind of an apples and oranges thing, because I'm like, I really do want to rewatch in the next year or two Fire of Love again, and I wish I could see it in the theater. That's when I would so jump at the opportunity to like feel that in my seats more and stuff. But yeah, okay, well, thank you to, as always, thank you to our listeners, and we'll see you guys on our next episode. Bye.
See ya.
Happy watching.